Cosatu says it's planning a mass picket campaign across the country after wage negotiations with government deadlocked. Workers are demanding a 10% increase across the board, while the employers are offering 3%. Let's talk about this with Michael Bagraim, a Labour analyst, joining us on Daytime Update. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Grateful for your time. Just how tight a corner is government in on this issue?
It's really tight. In fact, I can't see them getting out of it. Certainly not at 3%. You will recall last week they settled, after damning reports, they settled at the 6%, and they had said that they can't afford more than 3%. So it's taught the unions a lesson that you can't trust government. If they're saying they can't afford more than 3%, and then only 2 days later settled at 6% for a 3-year increase, we're going to see exactly the same over here, despite what government's saying. And we've got a history in any event that the trade unions now, because of the last 5-year history with their negotiations with government, just cannot believe them. There is no love lost, and there certainly is no trust. And we're sitting on a knife edge as a public, the South African public, because this is a massive strike in the offing. Mm-hmm. And if this goes to the wall, which it looks like it's going to after today's discussion, we've got problems, all of us. Every single South African's got a problem in that service delivery is going to take a massive knock. And as everyone knows, service delivery is at an all-time low. So we've got problems. And in fact, government can't afford more than 3% anyway. I don't know where they're going to get the money. So they've put themselves in a very tight corner.
You say government put itself in a very tight corner, and you reference past agreements, and the main one would be the 2018 multi-year agreement, would it not, that ultimately then became subject to a long court battle where government reneged, according to workers, on what it had committed to. Given the extent to which that is colouring these negotiations, what can government do to make right with Labour if it also can't afford to pay more than 3%?
Well, the only thing they can do is go back to the drawing board, to sit down with the trade union movement and actually open up fully and be fair with the trade union movement. What's happening right now is that on Wednesday we're going to be delivering the medium-term budget. Now, that's 3% is put into that budget. So what the government is doing, which is duplicitous, is that they budget first, they make the decisions first, and then they go and pretend to negotiate with unions thereafter. Now, if anything's underhanded, that is. And they've been doing that for years. And they're in a tripartite alliance. I don't know why government can't sit down with its alliance partner, Cosatu, and come clean and say, this is it, this is how much we can afford, this is what we can do. You put your hand in and tell us how we can actually make this work. They're not treating the unions as an equal partner. And I think government, again, I'm saying they're duplicitous. They're not actually treating them well at all. And if they can't afford it, then they must go and prove it and show the unions. We all know they can't afford it, but the unions are saying, well, you're stealing money left, right, and center. You're living off the hind leg of a hog, and you're actually enjoying yourselves. And here we're earning below inflation. We're going backwards. Right. So there's an argument from both sides. I also think now's the time for the Minister of Employment and Labour to get off his backside and to say to Cosatu, I'm going to call in the big guns from the our negotiating parties. We're going to force you in terms of Section 150 of the Labour Relations Act to have proper arbitration because the country can't afford this. And it's time now that we actually invoke the legislation. We go back to the Labour Relations Act, invoke the legislation, call in the CCMA, call in Advocate Morani, and say, let's actually do this properly. Okay. We can't actually take the public through this.
So just on the deal that's been put on the table so far from government, it does come, according to what we've read, with some sweetness, that 3%, including a 1.5% automatic pay progression and continuation of a 1,000 Rand a month after-tax cash gratuity, which would end in March of 2023. And some have said that just leaving it at 3% is a narrow way of looking at it when the broader deal is slightly perhaps more promising. Do you think that is a sweet deal given the current economic circumstances, not just at home but globally?
Yeah, look, I think it is. And it's because of my understanding of that government doesn't have the money. I just believe that Cosatu does not believe that. I have an understanding, after speaking to some colleagues from Cosatu in high-ranking positions, that they just don't believe government at all. They can't believe them. And it's this trust deficit that exists so radically right now that is forcing government, and they did this with the courts, as you saw. They said they couldn't, the minister said they couldn't afford more than 3%, they just don't have the money. And then they go and tell the unions, okay, we'll agree to 6. Now, what sort of message is that sending out to the unions now for this current negotiation? It doesn't make any sense at all.
What do you make, Michael, of the apparent split among Labour? Because at the recent SATU Congress, it appeared that the teachers' unions were warming up to this 3% increase offer with the, sweetness that come along with it. Would government at this point perhaps be relying on a split between Labour in terms of who accepts and who does not?
Well, they had to do that with the ports, but they got the majority to accept. Here, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing the majority leaning towards acceptance. And it's still languishing at 3%. I've got a feeling in my water they're going to have to go to the 6%, and then they can't afford it, and then we've got bigger problems. So, I'm not sure. This is between a rock and a hard place. And that's why I very strongly recommend voluntary arbitration between the parties so that you've got an external party. You've got the CCMA as the external people. They don't favour unions or government or business. They look at it and they say, we independent people, we'll have a look at it and we'll give a recommendation. And at that point, if the minister still feels that if the unions aren't following the recommendation, he can then make it compulsory.
Right.
And so that's what we've got legislation in this country to deal with this sort of thing.
So as you were mentioning the CCMA processes, today Cosatu itself said that conciliation will basically happen through discussions, I think, from about October 31st and 1st of November. For those of us who've never been in those rooms when such discussions happen, what does that process entail and how helpful might it be? I know you've referenced it slightly just now.
Yeah, it will be extremely helpful. As you know, I'm a user of the CCMA, have been for the last 25 years, and I have great faith in the ability of the commissioners. The senior convening commissioner, Advocate Moriani, will choose his best people for a possible strike of this nature. These people will go back to experts for input and advice, and I think at the end of the day, sense should prevail if we go down this proper route, not just the conciliation. If the conciliation fails, then, like I said, we have to invoke Section 150 of the Labour Relations Act. We can't afford to sit at 2 weeks, like we saw in the ports, with a strike, the country coming into a complete mess, and then for the minister to sit up and say, okay, maybe we must now make it compulsory arbitration. We can't afford that. And let alone the staff. Can you imagine? They're not going to earn whilst on picket lines. They're not going to earn anything. And people actually aren't wealthy. We look at civil servants and we think, oh, well, they get paid well, they're wealthy. They're not. And they can't afford going 2 weeks without salary. People then land up with loan sharks and all sorts of problems. So we've got bigger problems then. I think we must take this one very seriously, jump in quickly, get to the conciliation. If it fails that very next day, then the minister has to call for that arbitration.
Michael Bagraim, good to speak to you as always. Labour Analyst, thank you for your time.